I'm saying, how can I become more happy? So what I used to really love about Roger and Ramesh's talks was that they very simply said that what the person wants is to be more happy. So on the human level, what the person wants is to be more happy. And I think that's really true. I don't think that you get into this subject really wanting to know the nature of the universe. I think that that's a more surface one, believe it or not. I think that, like, on the human level, what the person wants is to be more happy. And I think as it becomes more disenchanted and more unhappy in society, it begins to ask more existential questions. But that's not always the case. There are some people that are born into this life just with more existential questions, and it's not because they suffer. But predominantly, that's just their karma. They're just set up that way. But predominantly, most people get into this subject because they want to be more happy, and they're looking for happiness. And they're looking for more peace in their life. Or they're looking to find that childlike wonder that they used to experience in childhood. And that they feel very, very disconnected from. Or maybe there's other reasons, like you start off in yoga and you slowly slip into this subject more and more. But predominantly, I think the motivation for the spiritual search is because you want to be happy on the human level. You want to be more at peace. And I love that about Roger and Ramesh's teaching, because before that I'd really been on the existential page, like I am consciousness, and really wanting to become enlightened and wake up. And then when I was hit with this teaching, it was like a new confrontation. So what you want on a human level is to be happy. Like you could say actually on the human level, like what it wants is to have pleasure in its life. The human being is set up to move towards pleasure, and if it's constantly unhappy, then it can't experience pleasure. So we're designed, I suppose, to move towards pleasure. That's my own little take on it. But I think it's great to really reflect on that. Like, is that what I want? And so Ramesh would sit in his rocking chair and get really angry with people when he would say to them, what is it you want? And they'd be like, I want consciousness. Or he'd say, who are you? And they go, I am consciousness. And he'd get angry on both of them. He'd be like, you don't want consciousness, you want happiness. And you aren't consciousness, you are the ego. I mean, it was really opposite to what I've been taught. Like, he also was saying that you are the ego. And through living with Roger and hearing this teaching again and again, I really began to understand what he meant by that. Like on the ego level, you are the character. On the human level, you are the character. And he would call that the ego. And it's the ego that's got the momentum to look for home. It's the ego that's got the momentum that wants freedom. And it's also the ego that wants to be happy. And then, you know, I was influenced by so many different teachers. These were my main teachers, but I was influenced by so many. And then I would say, and I don't know if it's what they would say, I can't quite remember, but I would say on that is that the suffering comes when the ego, it's so confusing because most people call the ego like separation, when the ego and consciousness become like this, and then you believe that your limitation is the ego, and you forget your connection. That's what Ramesh would say, connection to source. The connection to source is forgotten. They were so particular about it. It was really beautiful. And so when you just believe you're the ego, there's no sense of that which is bigger than the ego, like that which you are, that the ego isn't actually alive and experiencing. The ego is karma, habits and conditions that are arising. And who you truly are, what's experiencing, is consciousness. And then you can go deeper. So if you went to something like Tony Parsons, talk about this, went more Neo-Advaita, which I also really love, he would say, consciousness doesn't even exist. It's nothing appearing as everything, or it's just energy. But all these words are like the meanings, the connections everyone has. And then for me, the way that it manifests through this body, the way I speak, is I tend to be what I would call a tart with words. That's mostly a really un-PC way to say it. And in 50 years' time, I'll be like slammed by shame on the internet for being like really sexist and putting women down. But what tart means in an English language, which is really inappropriate to say this actually, and I apologize to women out there but tart means to sleep with lots of men or women, to have lots of sex. And it's kind of like a negative connotation. So I really shouldn't use that word, but what I was trying to suggest is that I'm a tart with words, like I sleep around with lots of words. Yeah, that just comes off worse and worse the more I go into that. Okay, I apologize already for 50 years in the future when that is so super offensive to people. Now, maybe people are laughing and they find it medium offensive. 50 years time, I'm up for the hanging. But by then I'll most probably be kaput. Oh God, I could still be live. Could be 90. Could be. Both my grands made it to 90. Over 90. Okay. So, what was I saying? That yeah, I'm really flexy with words. That got me all distracted. Yeah, but basically it's when these two come together, the ego and consciousness, and you believe the ego is conscious rather than there is consciousness of the ego. So your limitation isn't the ego. What often happens in spirituality, and which I did for many years, was that you believe that waking up is getting rid of the ego, and getting rid of all karmas and conditions. I remember when I was like 23 or 24, I studied playwriting at university, and I still write now. And I tried to write a play with a character that had no ego, and I thought no ego meant no wants, no desires, no habits and no conditions, no traumas, nothing like that. Like that, they were totally empty of all of that on the human level. And I couldn't get the character to do anything. And then I even began to realize like not doing something also was doing something. So it was like I couldn't make it work. I couldn't write an enlightened character. Like whatever I did, he always had a want or desire. Even if it was to do nothing, that was a want and a desire. So there was always a character or an ego being formed out of that. It was really fun to do, but I couldn't do it, obviously. I couldn't write what I thought an enlightened person was. And then through years, through meeting Roger, through meeting Ramesh, I began to realize that each body has what they would call an ego and what I would call a character. Each body has karma, habits, and conditions. Now, when this separation happens, it does change the person. So there are qualities in the person that don't arise anymore. Predominantly, most probably it's hate that like the one for sure that goes. I can't tell with other things because it depends on the way that person's set up. So if they were like really passive, maybe they become more active and more dominant. Or it could be that they become even more passive. That's hard to tell, but maybe hatred and seeking, obviously seeking, which you could say is hatred, stop. And that influences the character, so that influences the ego, but that's not it. But we all go through these phases. So you go through a phase of thinking, okay, the person, the ego has to become empty. So it misinterprets the talks and thinks the ego has to become empty and tries to empty the ego out. And it's always like, it's like a magic hat, like keeps pulling things out endlessly. It's like, how many things could I possibly fit in there? And that never ends. However, I do recommend going through that phase because normally by the time you've got into spirituality, you've got a lot of very abstract and maybe negative thoughts and feelings that are happening. And so diving into the ego and doing healing practices and exploring it can help calm it down. My goodness, I was in a jumble when I left home and got into this subject. I was in such a pickle, and like my belief systems. And I mean, predominantly for the first 20 years of my life, like most other people, I believed that my thoughts weren't my thoughts, but what were actually happening. So if I interpreted that someone was being angry or someone was being moody or that this room is shit, I thought that was real. You know, I had no concept that thoughts were just thoughts. They weren't necessarily the truth. It was like I couldn't separate sometimes what I was seeing from the thoughts. I couldn't not project. You know, so this is an amazing process that the human goes through. But as it goes down this sort of weird rabbit hole of waking up, it begins to shed lots of things and lots of ideas, and it eventually begins to shed the idea that I need to become an empty or perfect ego in order to wake up, or I need to look a certain way or be a certain way to wake up. And then it begins to shed the idea, who is the one that's ever going to wake up? Like, it's not the ego that's going to wake up. It's not me, the one that's shedding itself, going to wake up. Like, who is it? And it's that consciousness which has always been there. It's always been free, and it's always been pure, and it's never needed to improve itself, ever. Which is miraculous. It is miraculous. I love this subject. I'm so in love with this subject. 10 years I've been speaking about this subject so much, and the non-dual part is just so pure still. It's not that I dislike the human part, I really enjoy that, but to me, you know, it's heaven speaking non-duality. It's really beautiful speaking it. Most of the time. Oh my goodness. I don't know if it's me or if it's my partner. My partner is insanely honest. I've never met such an honest person in my life. I used to think I was fairly honest, like I could tell porkies. And then I met him, and I used to think I was empathetic, and then I met him, and I was like, oh. And so now I find that, you know, if there's something that's not slightly right, like I always want to go and correct it. So I wanted to say, you know, I said all that stuff about how much I love it, and then I was like, yeah, but sometimes, you know, if people are in resistance to it, so if someone I'm speaking to about it begins to really dislike it or get really angry, then it's not very nice speaking about it. But you don't need to know that extra bit of information, because it's not like intentionally there is dishonesty there. It's just that when you tell stories, there's always going to be exclusions of other parts of stories. But I think because I spend so much time with my partner, it like influences me. And I think I, like an already overly honest person, maybe becomes overly honest about everything. But I do still lie sometimes. Yesterday I stole one of his cakes that my mother had sent him. And then later I asked him if I could have one to see what it tastes like. And he said, but you've already had one. And I was like, you lied. I did. It's really unwise to lie. Someone said to me, it's the most stupid game to play, to lie. It's the most stupid play. Like if you look at life like a play, like a game, like a board game, like the tactic of lying is the most stupid. Which is sometimes we don't think that because we feel so victimized by people that lie. But it really is. I can be really stupid sometimes until I'm porky. Yeah, but it's a very stupid play. It just doesn't work. It's a disaster. It just hurts people. I forgot what I was saying. Yeah, I just love non-duality, expressing it. And so right now, the assumption is that you as someone are experiencing me, and that someone is you. And this is what Ramesh and Roger would call the ego part, but it's like it's like an identified ego. So what you feel yourself to be is like habits and condition. It's what I would call karma. So you believe yourself to be your behaviors. So if you're an honest person, that's who you are, which that isn't who you are. Even though I said I tend to be honest, that's not who you are. That's just a reporting back of what the body is. But there's not actually an individual entity inside the body that is honest. So I am honest. I am kind. Again, this isn't your truth. You know, when you feel like it's your truth, that you are honest and you're kind, then it becomes like an identity that you are attached to, that you're held onto and you're invested in. And then it's important for you to always be kind and always be loving. And then there'll be judgments against other people outside that aren't. Whereas when you just see it as karma of the bodies, it's just in flow. It's like just the way they are, they rely. I'm not suggesting that it's okay to lie. I'm just saying that you see it as what it is. Like people lie because of their karma. It's not personal. They're not really choosing it. Maybe for some people out there, because I had this speech about how it's stupidity, like it's a stupid game, maybe that will affect somebody's minds and their karma will change. But it's not personal. It's not somebody's karma. This is the lie. You always think it's my karma. I'm now in charge. I have to make sure I don't lie in future. Whereas actually there is information being imparted. And just like there is rain going into the soil, that it might influence that body, like the sunlight might, like the wind might, like the cars might, like the street lights might, the breeze, the internet, just like all of those things might influence you. It's the same with these words, but who is this one that's influenced? It's always this one saying, me, I'm influenced, I'm choosing. Whereas actually there is a machine there that's taking in information and evolving as it gets this new information. And this is called karma playing out. So everybody is like walking around karma. So it's really nobody's fault if you are a liar, or if you know a liar, or if you've been deeply scarred by someone lying to you. It's actually nobody's fault. There's nobody that's guilty of that. They're just acting out. That doesn't mean that you put up with it. Like if you've got somebody that lies in your life a lot, all of us lie to a certain extent. You know, if you're trying to steal your partner's cake, or you know, like because somebody's dress or something looks terrible and they directly ask you, or I don't know, or you just want simplicity, you want to get out of something simply, you know, you can see that somebody's getting very emotional about something and you just want to back away. But then there's another form of lying, which is where it's like, I suppose, more deceptive, like you're purposely trying to deceive people. And I mean, I know I was purposely trying to deceive with the cake thing. That's really naughty to do that, but it was kind of also fun, like a joke. It wasn't, I don't do that in other areas, but I did realize afterwards I really shouldn't do things like that, because it has an effect, you know, if you do that a lot. with partners, but I wasn't trying to do it in like somebody that's deceiving a lot is like you know, really trying to manipulate the other person and play the other person, and that's most probably dangerous to be around, because if you're playing from predominantly honest and they're playing from predominantly lying, then who knows how difficult or what they could be wrapping you up in. Like, so when you're emailing them or writing to them or speaking to them, they know the lie that's going on. So they know that there's lots of lying going on and deceiving going on. So who knows what you're getting involved in? You think that everything that's on the surface is what's happening. So they could wrap you up in all types of webs. That's my experience with liars, is like, it's, if they're really, you know, like if they really are deceiving a lot, then it just is, it's dangerous in your life. Like, it can bring your life a lot of trouble to be around, you know, and what they say to other people as well. And yeah, it's not a good idea. But the person that lies, it's not their fault at all. They're not guilty. So if you lie, or if you are honest, either one, or if you're blaming someone that's lied to you, it's nobody's fault. It doesn't mean you don't get upset when you find out the lies. That's very human and natural. It's shocking and disturbing to find that out on the human level. But deep down, there is a knowing that they couldn't be any different. You can't really go into hatred of them. They could not be any different. They're perfect the way they are. On the ultimate level, on the human level, change is desirable, but it's still perfect, and they couldn't have done it any differently. And if you looked at their life, like if you stretched it all out and looked at every occurrence, you'd really understand how that being got into lying and why it lies. And, you know, just as you've evolved to be honest because of everything that's happened to you in the past, and it's completely impersonal, and your karma that came into your body, which is completely impersonal, they've had that karma of that particular body. Nobody is really guilty. Everybody is innocent. It's like the Garden of Eden is innocence. So remembering yourself is innocent. It's like total forgiveness. You know, so Adam and Eve got chucked out of the Garden of Eden when Eve ate the apple of knowledge and became self-conscious. She became aware of her nakedness, and then they lost the Garden of Eden. And then, to me, going back into the Garden of Eden is remembering and knowing on a level beyond the human that it's all in flow. There's nobody that's individually acting. It's all one movement. So there's nobody that's naked, there's nobody that's guilty, there's nobody that's shameful. You know, so that Eve becomes embarrassed of her nakedness. Like, it's a representation, like what nakedness means is like, it's self-conscious. So it doesn't mean like I would be embarrassed to walk down the streets naked now. I mean, I could do it, I could surrender, but it would be embarrassing, you know. Like, it's embarrassing when you wipe your bottom and then you trail a big line of pooey toilet paper out of your pants. But it's also like, you can surrender to it and laugh to it. It's like, yeah, that happens to us all. But in that moment, it's embarrassing when someone's like, you know, so it's just remembered something really funny from last night. It just flashed in my head when I was doing this. Anyway, yeah, so Eve, sorry, it's just, there was a funny thing that happened last night when I went like this. But so it doesn't mean there's not momentary embarrassment. Like, that's part of being human. It's meaning something different. It's meaning like this belief that is who you are. And then when you believe it's who you are, it's like holding on to this identity, and like nothing can pass through. So the natural way of being is to be embarrassed and then it to pass through, or to be sad and for it to pass through. But when you're identified with the person, like it's horrifying for you to imagine for all these people to have seen you with pooey toilet paper hanging out of your pants, or it's horrifying for people to see you naked. But when you really see that you never did it, it's not your fault, you didn't screw up, you didn't leave the paper there, life did. And life is laughing at itself. There's nobody that's guilty, there's nobody that's naked. But it's not a human thing. It changes human, like, so the human most probably then afterwards processes emotions more rapidly, and there's not this seeking energy and this hatred. So those are the two qualities that go. But it's a detachment from that, or an energetic expansion back into everything. It's just so sweet. And I feel like when that movement, when there's the energetic break, or this expansion that happens, or the end of this, so that's the ego and that's the consciousness. So when it breaks, it stops being identified, or there's a break in that, then the person on the human level, I would say, becomes more happy, or more peaceful, or more balanced. That's my experience. It could be that person, though, that I'm saying becomes more happy, has more anger, or has more arguments with people, because that might be the more balanced conditioning in that body to be more fiery. It might be their more natural way of being. To have more conflicts, they might have been avoiding that all their life. But behind that, there's this sense of peace, or this deep knowing of freedom, which is what I say equals happiness. So I speak a lot about like all my issues on the internet, because I try to make it really clear about it not being getting over your issues. But more than likely, I would say, after what happened 10 years ago, this awakening, like I would say, I suspect, even like 99.9999% sure, I don't like to say 100% sure, because I know how bad people's memories can be, and but I would say that I'm a lot more happy and a lot more peaceful. Like I just know from my behaviors, like I used to have these meltdowns, and I don't really have them anymore, like emotional meltdowns in relating, and get angry, and those sorts of things don't really happen. And just overall, I feel excited to be alive, even when I feel sad and crying my eyes out. There's this like intimacy with being alive. And I think I go from emotion to emotion a lot quicker. But, I also know that I don't know, like the memory is a weird thing. It's a weird place. And who is this person? And really all we've got is now, and that's not so relevant. But because I named the talk, what did I name it? How can I be more happy, become more happy? I'm just trying to talk about that. So I do think the waking up is the freedom, and I think on the human level, more than likely, it produces more happiness, because there's not so much attachment to the thoughts, the ideas. Nice.